And we're back on Inside the Ropes, and tonight we have a WWE Hall of Famer. We have one of the best of all time. He competed in the first 9 WrestleManias. He competed in the very first WrestleMania match. He's a former Intercontinental Champion, Tag Team Champion. He sold out arenas all across North America. He is the one and only Tito Santana. Tito, welcome to Inside the Ropes.
Thank you very much, Kenny.
Tito, you started wrestling back in 1977. What made you get into pro wrestling? What made you decide to do that as a career?
Well, actually it was just a business move. I was playing football, and the career was really a short career in American football. So Tully Blanchard and his father offered me an opportunity, and I started thinking about wrestling actually my senior year in college, so I decided to give it a shot.
You've mentioned before that you didn't get on that well with Ole Anderson when you were in Georgia, and I just wondered, what was it that you didn't feel worked when you guys worked together down there? What was it that just didn't click?
He was just a mean person. He abused his power as far as I'm concerned.
Was that part of the reason that you left the territory and ended up going to the WWF in 1979?
No. Back then, the territories were small. From Georgia, I went to Charlotte. You used to stay in a place about a year, unless if you were one of the stars, and I was just learning and wrestling. The likes of Macho Man Randy Savage was just getting started himself, and Mr. Wonderful, and B. Brian Blair, and there was a lot of talent that was just getting going themselves, and you used to move around and go to a different territory and get a little bit more experience and compete against other guys that were up and coming themselves, and it was part of the business that you'd move around and go acquire more experience. I was really lucky that Andre the Giant helped me, so I got to New York pretty quick and pretty young, and it was the biggest break in my life.
Like you said, you ended up in the WWF in 1979, and you won your first tag team championship in the WWF with Ivan Putski in Madison Square Garden. So take us back to that night. What was that experience like? You're in the world's most famous arena, and you're winning the tag team titles with Ivan Putski from the Valiant Brothers. What was that experience like?
My career was moving pretty fast, and good things were happening to me. And when I teamed up with Ivan Putski, Vince Sr. told me that he was going to team me up with Ivan Putski, and to me, I knew that was a shot in my arm because Ivan Putski was already established. A lot of his popularity rubbed off on me, and to be teamed up with a completely established pro was just a big honor. And then finally we worked our way up and got a title match in Madison Square Garden, and we ended up going up against the Valiant Brothers. And just coming out there, every time I would come out in the big arenas, the fans started going crazy, and I started getting a lot of the fans behind me, and it was a great experience.
You ended up having a run in the AWA, and I just wondered, what were your memories of working there and working with Vern Gagne? What were your memories of that time?
When I went to AWA, I joined up with another good friend of mine, Dino Bravo. I was living there, and we became roommates, and the AWA was probably the second best territory in the country. They had great wrestlers there. I mean, you had Mad Dog Vachon, Baron Von Raschke, Ken Patera was there, John Studd. I mean, from top to bottom. There, in the AWA, every card was a main event card anywhere else. Vern used to run St. Paul and draw the same crowds that they would in Madison Square Garden, and he'd only have 5 or 6 matches, but every match was a main event match.
You did win the IC title, and you were the first Mexican-American wrestler to become the Intercontinental Champion. How did that feel? Did it feel like a big deal for you that you had accomplished that? Being
a Mexican-American, I was very proud to represent Hispanics from all walks of life. I was looked up to by all Hispanics, and I was really proud to be representing the Hispanics of the world, and I always prided myself in being a good role model. By that time, I was married and I had young kids, and I used to just think to myself, well, I'm going to be a role model, and my kids are never going to hear any negative things about me getting busted with drugs or doing drugs, and I just felt a lot of pride representing the Hispanics. You were in the first match at WrestleMania 1, and it seemed quite odd because you had been the Intercontinental Champion, and then you were the opening match on the WrestleMania card. There's a rumor that Vince McMahon put you in that spot for a specific reason. Is there any truth to that? I was kind of disappointed, because I thought that I was over pretty big in the WWF, and to become the opener of a card, WrestleMania, to me, that was almost an insult. Why was I not wrestling against Greg the Hammer Valentine when we had one of the hottest feuds around at the time? But before I went through the curtains, Vince told me, the reason you're here is because the first match, it's a do-or-die situation for the WWF, and I need somebody to go out there and get the people off their ass. That's what he said, and I couldn't think of anybody better than you. Then I realized how important I was, for the territory. He did want me to go out there and get the people going.
Shortly after WrestleMania, you had the famous rivalry with Randy Savage, the Macho Man, over the IC title. And everyone's got an opinion on Randy, but what do you remember about him and working with him in that program?
I just wish that we had had a longer program. They cut our program short. Randy became big because of Ms. Elizabeth. When he came into the WWF, he wasn't a polished wrestler then. Like all the rest of us, he learned because he came in and he was wrestling with top stars day in and day out, and he learned quick. He brought his gimmick and the way he used to treat Ms. Elizabeth, the way Vince McMahon put it all together, he made Randy Savage. I mean, Randy had been around. He started maybe a couple of years before I even started, and he hadn't gone far. He'd just been putting time in different territories, and then Vince McMahon just knew what to do with him, and he became one of the best in the WWF.
You hear various rumors that Randy would want to meticulously plan out all of his matches and plan every spot before he got out there. Is there any truth to that when you were working with him? Was he that meticulous?
When he first came in, he was not your top wrestler who could, just get in the ring and do it. That's the way we learned. Just get in there and you do it. And remember Mr. Fuji used to say, you go in there and you give the people what they want. Well, I don't believe that Randy had the ear for the people. He'd go in there and he'd have a match that he wanted to do, and in a lot of cases it was scripted, and sometimes if something would go wrong, he'd have a hard time getting back to the script, and in a lot of cases he was lucky enough to be wrestling against guys that could bring him back to the goals that both wrestlers wanted.
And in the 1980s, one of the things that a lot of fans remember is when Jesse Ventura on commentary would call you Chico. And I just wondered, is there a story behind that? How did that come about? Because it seemed to stick, and for years he would call you that on commentary.
He started calling me Chico when I went to the AWA. Him and Bobby the Brain Heenan was also there, and Bobby used to do some unbelievable, insulting interviews about me. He used to talk about Tito Santana. They found him in a corner in Mexico. Him and his family used to live in a 56 Chevy, and those guys were great talkers. And he calling me Chico really caught on. And at first, when I'd go to the arenas and they'd be wrestling fans waiting for us outside, when they'd holler Chico, I felt that they didn't like me. But then I realized they called me Chico because of Jesse, and Jesse was over so big. I should have changed my name to Chico, really. Because the fans liked it.
That can be your one regret of your career. You didn't change your name to Chico. How did you feel about going back into a team? Who suggested that you paired up with Rick? How did that all happen?
Rick had been teamed up with another guy. They were the Can-Am connection, and he ended up...
Tom Zink.
Zink, yeah. All of a sudden, overnight, he packed up his bags, and nobody knew where he went. And so they had put a lot of money into promoting the Can-Am, and all of a sudden he was gone. And Vince McMahon asked me if I would be willing to team up with Rick. And at the time, I preferred singles matches, but at the time, Vince didn't have me involved with anybody, and I was just hanging around, and I just saw an opportunity. And Rick Martel was such a great wrestler that it was a positive opportunity for me.
And when you guys in Strikeforce with Rick Martel, you guys had a run with tag titles. Who were your favourite opponents to work with while you were in Strikeforce?
Do you remember the Islanders?
Yeah.
We used to have some fantastic matches with those guys. And then we wrestled against Bill Eadie and Barry Darsow, Demolition. We had some fantastic matches against those guys. And the thing with Strikeforce, we were big enough and agile enough that we could have matches with the smaller teams, or we could have matches with the bigger guys. There were just so many tag team matches, good tag team matches back then, that it was really a good time.
And eventually, obviously, there was the breakup of Strikeforce at WrestleMania 5. How did it come about that you guys were going to break up? Did you want to go back to singles competition, or did Rick want to go into singles? How did the breakup come around?
Rick Martel had to take some time off. From what I understood, somebody in his family gotten ill, and he needed to be around, and he wanted to be around in Quebec. So he was going to be gone for quite a long period of time, and they had to split us up, and came back, and they put us together for a little while. He turned against me, and we ended up having a little run against one another, and just things that happen. Sometimes illnesses or injuries pull you apart.
When we announced on our Facebook page that you were going to be coming on the show, one of the most popular questions that people asked was they wanted to know that when you and Rick Martel broke up, there never really seemed to be that big pay-per-view blow-off match.
Vince McMahon was calling all the shots. I think Rick and I could have had a huge feud, and people wanted to pay and see matches against each other, and all of a sudden they hate Rick, the model, and they just never gave the people, to me, what they wanted to see, Tito Santana versus the model Rick Martel.
What did you think of Mr. Perfect and the gimmick and Kurt as a worker?
He was one of the best heels. He had charisma. He was a great wrestler, and very, very enjoyable matches against Kurt Hennig because he was such a great competitor.
Later on that year, in 1990, you would end up being part of the Ultimate Survivor Series main event match where it was you, Hogan and Warrior against all the heels. What did you think of Hogan and Warrior as the top guys in the WWF at that point? Because they were kind of the muscle guys, as opposed to the workers who were maybe like the IC champion. What did you think of those guys as workers?
As workers, I didn't think much of either one of them. As far as I'm concerned, neither one of them were ever good workers. But both of them had a lot of charisma, and they both drew a lot of money. The people loved those guys. There again, it was Vince McMahon who knew what buttons to push, and he got them over. And Ultimate Warrior was selling more merchandise than Hulk Hogan, and he was over more than Hulk Hogan. So for me to be in the ring and then two guys was quite an honor for me.
Not long after you had that big Survivor Series main event match, it seemed like in 1991 that there weren't really much plans for your character anymore. They had you in the match with the Mountie at WrestleMania 7 when you lost in quite a quick match. In terms of changing over to the El Matador gimmick, was that something that you suggested, or did somebody come to you with that? How did that all happen?
Vince is the one that suggested that. As a matter of fact, by that time I started to get a little frustrated. I would have meetings with Vince and I'd tell him, you're not using my ability. I have so much to offer, and I don't understand why you're not doing anything more with me. And before he started talking about the idea of me becoming a Matador, and I wasn't crazy about the Matador idea, but I said, well, maybe he's got plans. Maybe he's going to give me another shot in the arm and give me a big push, but it didn't turn out to be the case. That's why I left shortly after that.
In terms of the Matador gimmick, when it was suggested to you, you said you weren't crazy about it, but once it started, did you think it had potential? Was it something that you thought could have worked?
I thought it had potential. TV was so powerful that if Vince would have wanted it to go, he would have made it go. Because, I mean, I think that I was a good enough worker to make it. I feel that I dove right into the gimmick, and I thought that I did a pretty good Matador. I would have gotten better with time, but if something doesn't get pushed, it's not going to get over. And they pushed it for a little while, and then they dropped it.
You were actually the first wrestler to defeat The Undertaker in Spain when you were still doing your Tito Santana gimmick. What was that experience like? Because the fans went crazy when you beat him. What was that like to do that in Spain and for the fans to go so crazy for the victory?
At that point, I believe that they were going to start doing something with Tito Santana again, and I heard a buzz in the air that Vince McMahon was going to start expanding into Mexico and South America and Central America and Spain, and I do believe that that's one of the reasons why I got a win over The Undertaker, and something happened. And then all of a sudden, the plans to go into Mexico and South America and Central America just disappeared, and so did Tito Santana.
After you left the WWF in 1993, you were part of the early ECW. How did you end up there, and what did you think of that promotion? This was before it became Extreme, but what were your memories of working there? I
was involved in a tournament, and I ended up beating Don Morocco for the world title there. But Paul Ellering was running the show, and I just didn't like the way it was being run, and I got the title, and I just never went back. I wasn't impressed. I didn't like the way things were run in the dressing room, and I just didn't want to be part of it. You
would end up back in the WWF in 1997 as a commentator for the Spanish announce team. So how did that opportunity arise for you, and was that something that you were quite excited about doing, or how did that all come about?
Hugo, one of the guys that used to do the commentating, he had problems with the law. I don't know what it was, but he had to go, and Vince told him to take a leave of absence and go take care of his problems, and they needed a Spanish commentator, and then I came in, and like I was learning a new trade. And I enjoyed it because I would only work a couple of days a month, a couple of days a week, which was nice. And then all of a sudden, about a year later, Hugo took care of all his problems, and he came back, and Vince took him back, and they let me go.
In 2004, you were put into the WWE Hall of Fame. Who contacted you about that, and is that something that fans sometimes don't understand, whether do wrestlers see the WWE Hall of Fame as an honour, or do they see it as a payday? How do wrestlers feel about it?
I really wasn't interested in going because I had been to the very first one they had. It was a rinky-dink one in Baltimore a few years earlier. It wasn't a big deal yet. I never realized how big it had gotten because I had been away from the business for a while. When I went to New York and I saw all the people that were there and the way the fans accepted the inductees into the Hall of Fame, then it became something honorable. It's an honor to be a Hall of Famer in the WWF now.
Bruno Sammartino for years has expressed that he has no interest in being a part of the WWE, and he's not happy. He would never be a part of their Hall of Fame, but it's now become official. He's now going to be put into the Hall of Fame this coming April in Madison Square Garden. What do you think about Bruno going in the Hall of Fame?
It's been long overdue. Bruno was a great world champion for the WWF, so it's been long overdue. I'm sure it's a business move for Bruno. He was very bitter towards Vince McMahon, and somehow they patched things up. I mean, this is the first I've heard of it.
There you go. Jose Nevarez wanted to ask you from our Facebook page, how did it feel being one of the few Latino wrestlers during your era that was successful? You won the IC title and the tag titles. How did it feel to be sort of almost like a pioneer?
It's good. I mean, we were in New York in the early 80s when we used to go to arenas and they'd only 20,000 capacity, and it'd be like 1,500 fans inside the ring. So we built the business, and we were there in the beginning. We saw the beginning, and we saw it grow, and we considered ourselves the pioneers. And I guess now we're considered the legends, and it was a good time.
In 2008, you released an autobiography called Tales from the Ring. What made you write a book? And
I figured I had a good story to tell, and a guy approached me that he wanted to write a book about me, and we did it, and I went with a company that ended up going bankrupt, so Tales from the Ring never really went far. They never promoted it, and they just printed just a few books, and they all sold out, and the company went bankrupt.
I think the only way that people can get a hold of it now is to go onto Amazon, and there might be a few copies left on there, so if people want to get a hold of it, then they can get a hold of that book on there. But Tito, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and talking about your career.
Thank you very much, Kenny.
Take care. Bye.